I would love to welcome everybody here. My name is Lynn Wilson, and I'm president of Myositis Support and Understanding, and I'm a dermatomyositis patient. I'm here with my colleague, Paula Eichenbrenner, who is executive director of the Myositis Association. And we're here to talk today about upcoming adult DM externally led patient-focused drug development meeting that we are hosting on June the 7th. Right off the bat, I just like to say how glad I am to have all of you here today, that you could join us. I think we're looking for an exciting adventure on June the 7th. So welcome. What I want to talk about today is that the externally led patient-focused drug development is a really exciting, important opportunity for us to inform the Food and Drug Administration and other stakeholders about the patient and caregiver perspectives of living with dermatomyositis. So in a nutshell, this is all about sharing your story. And that's what our focus will be as we go through talking about the meeting for the day. What we're looking for as a focus for this event is to bring your stories to the FDA on how DM impacts your lives and your experience with treatments and your hopes for future treatments. It's all about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is your time. This is your moment to help the FDA understand and step in your shoes for a moment to understand your journey. One of the outcomes that we're hoping for is that this will help inform the FDA on better understanding of decisions that will have to be made for new drugs for dermatomyositis, and also to improve the development of drugs and accelerate treatments. One of the things, before I talk about meeting the team, one of the things I did want to say about the meeting today of what it won't cover. Today, we're not going to talk about information about dermatomyositis or treatments or clinical trials. If that is what you need in terms of support or education or information, then you should visit the websites for Myositis Support and Understanding or the Myositis Association. And I'll have somebody put those in the chat box, and we could talk about that later. So before I start, I want to talk about the team that has worked so hard in the background on this. And we spent a lot of time, maybe 8 months, something like that, about 7 or 8 months on this. Want to acknowledge Benita Moyers, who's our vice president at MSU, Manuel Lubenis, chief science officer, and Karen Chung, who's patient and research advocate in Europe. From the Myositis Association side, you'll be meeting Paula in a few minutes. I'd like to also acknowledge Linda Colbert, who's a research and communications specialist, and Martha Arnold, who's on the board. Also, I'd like to mention and acknowledge our generous sponsors who have made this event possible for us today. And I would just say about these sponsors is that they are fully invested in supporting the dermatomyositis community and are very, very focused on helping to find a cure for this insidious disease. And I can't speak enough of how generous they have been to us and supportive. So why are we here today? It's a simple question, actually a complex question. But what we're trying to do is to, as I say, be able to educate the Food and Drug Administration and other stakeholders on what it's like to live with dermatomyositis. As I said, it's about learning to understanding what journey we walk every day with this disease. And what we can do during this meeting is bring to this table your passion and your energy and your determination to speak your voice. And that's what we will be doing during the session, is making sure that we can that you have the platform to talk about your disease, and there'll be many ways that that can come about. So why should you participate? Because this is I wouldn't call it a once in a lifetime event, but it's a one-time event that gives you the opportunity to have your voices heard at the highest level. And the reason for that is that the FDA approves all treatments for dermatomyositis, and they need to know what's important to you. We want them to be able to step, as I say, step in your shoes for a day and hear what you suffer, the joys, the defeats, everything that goes on with living with this insidious disease. And this is our time and our moment to do that. And as I've said before, one of the things that we think that this will help is to impact their decision-making and potentially lead to better treatments and faster approval times for dermatomyositis treatments. And why now? Well, unfortunately, the patient voice, and some of you know this, has historically been absent from the drug development process. Usually the FDA doesn't contact patients, or the drug company doesn't contact patients until a drug is failed, a clinical trial has failed, or perhaps there was a drug that approved by the FDA, but sometimes to treat symptoms that really weren't important to the patient. So it's just critical that the FDA understand what the patient perspective is and what the patient goes through on a daily basis to understand the burden of care that we live with. So they've tried very hard to provide a process where your voice can be heard in a systematic way throughout the process, and then provide the FDA with a perspective. The stakeholder engagement is a very high priority for the FDA. Our voice matters, and this is the way that we can tell our story, and this is the way the FDA can hear our voice. And to do that, they initiated what's called a patient-focused drug development program to enable them to learn about the disease impact on patients' lives from patients and caregivers. And that is what you're going to hear about today from our consultants. So let's get started on this, and I can stop talking about it and we'll actually give you some information about it. I'd like to turn it over to Paula now, and she's going to introduce James and Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and thanks again to MSU for the opportunity to support this PFDD effort. It has been such an incredible opportunity for our organizations, TMA and MSU, to come together and collaborate on an initiative that will help people living with dermatomyositis. We're thrilled to participate, thrilled to be here today, and I just want to very briefly underscore what Lynn shared about how FDA wants to hear from you about your most significant symptoms and the impact that DM has on your lives. What treatments are you currently using, and where do those treatments fall short? It's only with that understanding that FDA can help make treatment that would be more helpful to our community. And look, everyone's experience is different. Everyone's voice is important, and there is power in numbers. We really need you. So thanks again for being here today, and look forward to seeing you on June 7th as well. Now, as Lynn said, it's my honor to welcome James Valentine and Larry Bauer from Hyman, Phelps, and McNamara. We've had the pleasure on the TMA and MSU PFDD teams of getting to know James and Larry over the past several months as they have been helping with our FDA engagement. James has worked for the last 15 years as a champion for the patient voice as part of the regulatory process. He previously worked at the FDA, where he was a patient liaison, helping to incorporate the patient voice into medical product review across FDA's various medical product centers and review divisions. There, while at FDA, in fact, he helped to develop and launch the patient-focused drug development initiative. Larry worked at the NIH for 17 years in clinical research, followed by a position at the FDA as a regulatory scientist in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research's Rare Disease Program, a group Larry co-founded and where he worked for 10 years advancing rare disease drug development. Now in private practice, James and Larry have worked with many patient organizations to ensure their respective communities' voices were heard by decision makers and regulators. Relevant to our adult dermatomyositis EL-PFDD meeting, James and Larry have been side by side with us, helping plan, and relevant to the entire spectrum of PFDDs. It's worth noting that they have been involved in about 3/4 of the more than 80 externally led PFDDs. So we know that we are in good hands with James and Larry. We're really excited to introduce you to them today. And James, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you for that kind introduction. And thanks to you and Lynn for both help setting the stage for our discussion today. Larry and I are very excited to provide this community some information that we think will help you all feel more prepared for participating in this externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. Or for those of you who are attending and you're not sure, is this even the right opportunity for me? Hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll really get have a good understanding of what this meeting is all about. And our hope is that you'll want to attend and help share your voice. So as part of our session today, our plan is to give you some background on FDA and drug development. This may be a little bit of a refresher for some of you who might be a little bit more familiar with clinical trials and the phases of clinical trials. But we think this is important because to be good advocates, it's helpful to understand the process, because then the second thing we'll be doing as part of today is describing where your voices as patients or as caregivers of people living with the condition, where your voices fit into that process. And then how this meeting is going to actually bring forward your voices to plug into that process. And we'll be sure to give you an overview of this EL-PFDD meeting so you actually will know what it looks like, what is planned for the day. And we'll end our discussion today with some real practical information, including even some tips for how to best participate. So I'm going to start us out giving you that background on FDA and drug development, really as kind of the foundational information. So I'm going to walk us through some of the different stages of drug development, starting with the earliest stages, which are really at the phase of drug discovery. This is essentially the idea here of in drug discovery of actually doing the basic science research, the kinds of things that academic institutions, the NIH, are studying and researching. The organizations hosting this PFDD meeting have likely contributed dollars to help fund some of this research. And here we're looking to better understand diseases like rare diseases in particular, where the disease process may not be fully well understood, and we're always learning more and more about it. And by better understanding the disease itself, it gives us an idea of where we might be able to intervene in that disease course in order to stop the disease course, reverse it. And once we understand what those opportunities might be, that then gives us a chance to start trying to figure out what kinds of molecules or cells or enzymes or other types of compounds would have an opportunity to try to intervene in that process. And we might be looking at things that already exist, maybe treatments that are even approved for other conditions, that have some unanticipated effect that might help and be specific to this disease. Or we might be inventing new technologies or using new novel approaches that are more targeted to try to intervene in the disease process. But whether we're using something that's been around or something that's completely altogether new, once we've identified those candidates, we then can take that candidate into the next phases of development. And so at the bottom of the screen here, you'll see a diagram, and we're going to walk at a high level through each of these phases in the diagram. But this is at the point where we have a potential product, and we need to start now investigating it. And before we ever study a product in people, that's what we call clinical testing, because we're in the clinic. before we ever go into people, into patients, we first need to do preclinical development work, which is work to study and examine that potential drug, that potential therapy, to see, is it reasonably safe for use in humans? As you see from advertisements, from drugs on TV, drugs often come with a lot of side effects. This community, has some experience with that. And so, we need to first understand, before we know what side effects in humans there are those side effects too serious to even advance that molecule, or at what doses of that drug, are they too toxic to take into humans? And can we get to a dose that's a lower dose that isn't toxic, but as you can see here, also might be sufficiently effective? So while we're evaluating the drug safety profile through what are called toxicology studies, at the same time, we're also looking to see, does the product have, sufficient effectiveness at targeting the disease? And we're looking at this through different types of assays, maybe even human cell lines, as well as animal models of the disease, where we try to genetically modify mice and other animals to where they replicate the particular disease, so we can see, does the treatment actually reverse that phenotype? And so by doing this preclinical development, that helps us pick doses that are both likely to be safe and effective to take into human clinical trials. But before we can go into clinical trials, this preclinical information is provided to FDA in what's called an investigational new drug application, which is referred to in short as an IND. So that IND will be submitted by a researcher or a drug developer. It will include that information I was describing, the pharmacology studies being how effective the drug is, and the toxicology studies being the safety of the drug. But in addition to that, those preclinical studies, there's going to be information about how the drug is manufactured. Throughout drug development, we need to also make sure that we are having a high quality product. We want to make sure that when patients get a drug, they're getting the right amount of the drug, that when it's manufactured, it's made consistently, so you're not getting too much of the active ingredient, too little of the active ingredient. We want to make sure there's not impurities that could be harmful when given to people as part of the manufacturing process. So that information is provided as part of that IND. And the IND includes the proposal, the clinical trial design, which is called the clinical protocol, is also presented to FDA, along with information that will be provided to investigators as well as to the patients or other healthy volunteers that might be participating. So FDA reviews this bundle of information, and they have 30 days to do this and get back and either can allow the study to proceed, or they might have feedback even if they do, or they might put the study on clinical hold because they don't think it's safe yet, or there's enough information to go into humans. But assuming we can proceed, generally the first type of clinical trial that happens is called a phase 1 clinical trial. So phase 1 studies are the smallest, shortest trials. In fact, they often, with novel drugs, will just start with single doses, where we give just a single administration of the dose, even if the drug is intended to be given lifelong. The first trial might only give a single dose, and we might start with a really low dose and work our way up. It's called dose escalation. And we might then go to a multiple dose escalation study where we give, the drug for a month, and then escalate doses. And the primary emphasis here is we want to make sure that there's no safety concerns, certain really serious things we might be able to identify right away. Are people having allergic reactions, that type of thing. And it's also going to help us, even though this is a small number of people, identify the most common side effects. So we really want to make sure those most common side effects are not really serious side effects. Once we've evaluated this doses, we're also going to be at this stage, examining where the drug goes within the body, how long it stays in the body, does it get to the right organs, it needs to be effective. That type of information is also really critical, to selecting, ensuring that we have the right, product, but that we're selecting the right dose of the product that's both, again, safe, but likely to be effective. In phase 1 trials, we do not typically assess whether the drug is working or not. Is it having a benefit? So once we've done a phase 1 clinical trials, we then move into phase 2. Phase 1 clinical trials, I should distinguish, sometimes can be in what are called healthy volunteers, which are people that are not living with a particular disease or condition that volunteer to be in those initial trials, where, again, we're really looking at safety. So we don't necessarily need to go into patients because we're not looking at how the drug works. Certain drugs might need to go into patients first because they, like for example, a gene therapy, is a kind of you can't take that back. It's you're changing and editing, changing or editing, someone's genetic composition or the composition of some of the cells in their body. And so you would do that in patients versus healthy volunteers. When we go into phase 2, we're always now going into patients. It's the same goes with phase 3. So in phase 2, these are slightly larger and slightly longer studies. We're now starting to want to understand whether the drug has signs or signals of effectiveness. We kind of call this proof of concept. We're going to prove the concept that the drug can work. We still may be evaluating multiple doses of the drug to see, which has that best benefit risk profile. And here we might, actually be introducing the idea of a controlled trial. So introducing a placebo, often we think of this as like the sugar pill, where that way when we're doing our assessments, we are blinded. We don't know whether someone's actually on real treatment or on the placebo. So that way we can see whether the benefits that are being seen are really due to the drug, or is it this placebo effect where people, because they're getting something, feel like they're doing better. And almost every disease has placebo effects. That's a very well-established thing. We're still, of course, always looking at safety. And now that we're dosing more people and a little bit longer, we get to start to see if there's different side effect profile that's beginning to show up here. And so, phase 2 gives us the best opportunity to pick the optimal doses to take into phase 3. Phase 3 is really kind of our pivotal trials. This is where we're planning to establish the drug's benefit. And so these tend to be sometimes referred to in the media or even in publications as registration trials or pivotal trials. But the idea here is these are our large scale, usually randomized placebo-controlled studies. We're doing, long-term continued assessment for chronically dosed therapies to establish their effectiveness. Not only are we looking at kind of perhaps maybe how initially effective they are, we can now assess more of their duration of effect. It is not uncommon for a chronic condition to evaluate, the drug's effectiveness out to 6 months, 12 months, even longer. Because these studies are larger, we can begin to look at subpopulations. So when you have more people, you can have enough people in different subpopulations, whether that's male versus female, different age groups, maybe different severity of disease when people entered the study. We can say, does the drug have a different either benefit or risk profile amongst different of these subpopulations? And again, we may still be looking at varying doses, and because these are such big studies, we should be able to actually see if there are differences, again, in the benefit or risk profile of different doses that are studied. As always, we're looking at safety, and these studies are really helpful because these are the largest studies at starting to see some of those less common side effects. Now, we never see all of the side effects that occur because, we're not introducing this drug to the entire population and getting to see those rarest side effects. But we get a really good idea of what the safety profile is. In phase 3 studies, we're usually also, people are taking, common medications that they would normally be taking. And so we also can help assess and ensure that there's not drug-drug interactions. So once all of those phases of clinical trials are complete, and often, for each of those stages, there could be more than one. There could be multiple phase 1, phase 2, or even phase 3 clinical trials. Although in rare diseases, it's very common, to have an approval based off of a single phase 3 trial. All of that information needs to be evaluated. And instead of the drug developer or the researcher just putting it all together and putting it into FDA to review, the first thing that they want to do is go in and talk to FDA and have what's called a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting, which refers to the names of the applications they'll be submitting. The NDA is a new drug application. A BLA is a biologics application. They're essentially the same thing. It just depends on if we're talking about a small molecule drug, like a synthetic fine chemical, or a biological product, like a cell, protein, antibody, gene therapy, or even a vaccine. Those would all be biologics. But essentially the approval requirements are the same for those. And so, first, this meeting will be held with FDA. Again, it's called a pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting. The top line data from the pivotal trial are presented. There's a discussion of what's the right way to actually analyze and assess that data. And the goal is to walk away from that meeting having uncovered any major unresolved issues. And the ideal is that there isn't anything major that needs to still be done. But it's better to identify it now than wait to submit an application to FDA and then have them deny the application. If it's very clear there's still more work that needs to be done, whether that's a whole new study or an additional study, or maybe it's just more analyses or going back and sometimes it could even be another non-clinical study. Whatever it might be, we want to uncover what that is. So that way, once we get to the time of where a company is actually submitting their, new drug applications or biologics license application, their NDA or BLA, that we're de-risking it. We want FDA. There's always going to be review issues. FDA has to look at all the data when they do that review to determine what the benefits and the risks are. But we don't want there to be those major glaring holes in the data package. So when FDA does get that NDA or BLA, the first thing they're going to do is look at it and say, is this a complete application? And they're going to assign their review team. And when they're doing this, they're going to, make sure that, they have what they need. And it's the application isn't so deficient that they need to do what's called refuse to file. Because FDA, what they're doing is they're reviewing the submission to see if they're going to file and review it. So assuming that they do actually file this and begin their review, FDA assesses whether the drug is, its effectiveness has been demonstrated for the drug's proposed use. Drugs can be proposed to use in different ways. So, if a drug developer is asking only for adults in a particular disease, FDA is looking, do they have data in adults? If they're asking for adults and kids, FDA is looking to have they demonstrated it in both populations, or maybe if they haven't studied all the age ranges, can we extrapolate to those other age ranges? So what FDA is reviewing will depend on what the proposed use of the drug is. So FDA is doing the same thing then for safety. They're looking at all of the safety information. They want to conclude that the drug is safe, which is, there's no little bar for, that applies across the board for what's safe. Safety is relative to benefit, so that's why we always say that FDA is weighing whether the benefits of a drug outweigh their risks. And as I mentioned before, quality is important, and it's really important at this stage because the drug is now being manufactured at such a larger scale, because the idea is they're anticipating manufacturing enough to supply anyone who would be prescribed the drug, many more patients than were in clinical trials. And so FDA reviews, again, the manufacturing information to ensure that drugs are high quality. You might have heard of advisory committees or advisory committee meetings. These are panels that FDA can call of external experts, which always will include a patient representative. The patient representative might not always have the exact condition that's being, the subject of the advisory committee, but FDA tries to do that, or if not, they still at least want to have a patient voice on the panel. And the panel overall is helping, weigh in and give FDA advice. FDA will ask them questions and even ask them to vote. But ultimately, FDA is still the one that decides whether to approve the drug or not. whether, the advisory committee votes, the drug should be approved or shouldn't be approved. It's still ultimately on FDA to take that advice and figure out what their decision is going to be. If a drug gets approved, this whole process doesn't just stop. There continues to be post-market safety surveillance. So drug companies, as well as then FDA, they're getting reports of different safety issues that are happening out in the real world. That's getting reported back and filed to FDA. Clinical trials, by definition, they're not fully representative of everyone in the real world. Certain people are excluded from clinical trials, but they and their doctor may determine that they're a good candidate for a particular drug. And so we're learning actually a lot more about, the drug's profile when it's out on the market. And so ultimately, FDA still has an ongoing responsibility to ensure that the benefits of the drug continue to outweigh the risks. So I've talked a lot about the process. We've gone through it pretty quickly and at a high level. But again, we think that that's really important. I want to talk a little bit more specifically about FDA's role in that process. So during drug development, and we talked about those clinical trials, FDA is not actually the one developing drugs. That's researchers, whether at academic institutions or not-profit, organizations. It could be pharmaceutical companies. It's other parties that are actually doing research and drug development. And FDA is actually not even testing drugs, in clinical trials. So when a trial is then presented by a researcher or drug company to FDA, FDA is not going out and running that trial. The researchers and drug developers are. FDA is not there on site when these studies are being run. This is all being done, under that clinical trial protocol that we talked about, that the plan, the design for the study, which FDA looks at and gives feedback on and ensures is safe for patients. But FDA is then not the one implementing or operationalizing clinical trials. It's also important to note that when drugs are approved, there's certain things that FDA is involved in, but also not involved in related to this. So once a drug's approved, FDA does not have the authority to regulate the practice of medicine. So FDA, they regulate the development, we talked about that, but also the marketing. They regulate what drug companies are allowed to say, how they promote their drug, whether it's in a direct-to-consumer advertisement, like a TV commercial, or if it's what goes in a pamphlet that's handed out to healthcare providers at a conference. That is all regulated by FDA. Doctors, however, are not regulated by FDA. FDA or doctors are free to use FDA-approved drugs within their practice of medicine, including for other conditions or other populations that aren't approved by FDA. And this is known commonly as off-label use of medications. So I want to also mention FDA, they're not involved in the regulation of access to products or the pricing of products. So FDA, they don't get that information when they're making their approval decision. It's based off of the direct benefits and risks. It's not cost benefit, it's benefit risk. And so FDA doesn't have that information. Even if they have it, it's not within their legal regulatory framework to consider price. So they're not influencing whether then also insurers can cover medications or not. That is all outside of FDA's purview. So I mentioned a lot about what FDA doesn't do. So let me say something about, FDA's role. So FDA, they do help, though, even though they're not conducting clinical trials, they help facilitate drug development. Part of their mission is not just to protect public health, but also to promote it. And so FDA reviewers, you can imagine, they are seeing every clinical trial that's being done. They're seeing the design, they understand the designs, and then they see the results. And they see what works, what doesn't work. So they have a lot of really, important knowledge and experience and expertise within FDA. And so when drug developers come and meet with FDA, FDA is providing technical feedback and giving them guidance. And I didn't, I could have put a bunch of arrows along those different, that little chevron I had put across the bottom of those slides for the different phases of drug development, showing all the different times that companies meet with FDA. It's not just at the beginning and end. And so that's a very iterative process. And in between those phases, companies are coming in and sharing like their phase 1 data and helping have that inform and design phase 2. So FDA does play a role and tries to help give the best advice that they can to help inform and guide clinical trial design and drug development. And it really is done, when companies go and ask to have those meetings with FDA. So I tried to cover a lot in the short amount of time that we have, but if you're interested in more, you can go to this FDA webpage listed here, www.fda.gov/for-patients. This has a lot of great information, more information about FDA's work in regulating medical products. It also gives you some good information on other ways beyond the meeting we're talking about today to engage with FDA as a patient stakeholder. But at this point, I'd like to turn over to my colleague, Larry Bauer, who's now going to talk about where your voice as patients and caregivers fit into that process. Larry?
Thank you so much, James. So now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about the meeting that we are planning. Next slide. So what is the purpose of this patient-focused drug development meeting? The FDA had wanted to develop a more systematic way of gathering patient perspectives about different diseases and conditions and the available treatment options. So they came up with this whole, idea of having one-day-long meetings called patient-focused drug development meetings, where they would meet with patients and caregivers and listen and learn from them and spend the entire day learning about these conditions. This kind of information really helps inform the FDA's understanding of the context for benefits and risks when they assess those in decision-making for new drugs. And patient input really helps the FDA during drug development, as well as during the review of a drug application for when they're ready to review all the data that and go through that process, that final process that James just mentioned. Next. So I just mentioned something called a benefit risk assessment. This is a formal assessment that's done by the FDA for every drug that they are reviewing. And the purpose of it is to decide whether the benefits of this new treatment outweigh the potential risks, so the potential side effects for that condition. So in order to understand this, they need to analyze what is the disease or condition and what are the current treatments that are available to people living with that condition. This kind of helps them to understand the current state of things. And then as far as the benefits of the treatment and the potential risks, this is the data that they review from clinical trials. So when a company submits all their data for an NDA or BLA to the FDA evaluates what did those clinical studies show, and what did they, what were the potential side effects of this new treatment. So these first two things, the analysis of the condition and the current treatment options, that's where the meeting that we're having is really going to benefit and help the FDA. Next slide. So for our externally led patient-focused drug development meeting, one of the things the reason it's called externally led is because it's external to the FDA. We're planning it ourselves outside of the FDA. The FDA's been supporting us to develop the meeting, but it is our meeting. This meeting is going to be a framework for discussing questions that came from the FDA's benefit risk framework, and it represents important considerations in the FDA's decision-making. So we reviewed past meetings and other disease area questions, and we've tailored our agenda and panel questions for our meeting to try to communicate the most important information related to dermatomyositis. And FDA has emphasized to us that active patient involvement and participation is the key to the success of these meetings. So that's why we're meeting with you today, to try to get you excited about it. Next slide. And people always say, what's going to come out of this meeting? Well, at the end of the day, we have hired a medical writer that's going to write everything that happens at the meeting into a report. It's called the Voice of the Patient Report. This is a summary of the patient and caregiver and audience testimony, the polling that we're going to do, as well as your submitted written comments. This document then becomes a key communication to the FDA review staff, as well as drug developers or anyone who wants to read it, about what is most important in a treatment to patients and caregivers with dermatomyositis. And FDA really wants this information. It informs them about ways that meaningful treatments for dermatomyositis can be developed. Next slide. So now, how do you participate in the meeting? So the meeting is for dermatomyositis patients and caregivers, FDA staff. We hope that pharma and biotech companies will come, and it's a public meeting. So basically anyone interested in learning about dermatomyositis can attend. The meeting will take place on June 7th from 10 a.m. Eastern to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a virtual meeting, so folks can attend anywhere. I think earlier there was a question about, Europe or some other part. You can tune in from anywhere in the world where you've got the internet. It's an interactive live stream, and you can see the link at the bottom of the page. Next slide. So just to go over the agenda on the day of the meeting on June 7th, first there's going to be a welcome and some introductory comments from the dermatomyositis advocacy groups and the FDA. Then we'll hear a clinical background by a dermatomyositis expert. This will be followed by interactive discussions that are going to be divided into two topics. In the morning, we're going to ask and focus on how DM symptoms affect your life. So what symptoms do you have? Which ones affect you the most? We'll take a lunch break for a half hour, and when we come back, we're going to shift gears and talk about how do you manage symptoms of DM? What are your current approaches and current treatments? And what would your future, if there was going to be a new treatment for DM, what would you like to see? Some of the topics will include pre-recorded patient panels, and they'll include polling questions and a moderated discussion with the audience, who is you. At the end of the day, we'll have a summary of the meeting and then followed by some closing comments. Next slide. So just to give you an idea of some of the discussion questions, there'll be a time during the meeting where we're going to ask you to pick up your telephone and call in. The telephone number will be at the top of your screen. Some of the questions for the first topic are, maybe of all the symptoms of DM, which 1 to 3 symptoms have the most significant impact on you or your loved one's life? How does DM affect you or your loved one on best and worst days? And describe those days. And then, are there specific activities that are important to you that you or your loved one can't do at all or as fully as you would like because of having DM? Next slide. To continue, and other questions that might be asked, how have you or your loved one's symptoms changed over time? And how has the ability to cope with the symptoms changed over time? When we talk about symptoms, we want to know about physical symptoms as well as psychological and emotional symptoms. And then, what do you fear the most as you or your loved one gets older? What do you worry about that, how your condition might change, and what frustrates you the most about having this condition, especially over the long term? Next. As I said, in the afternoon, we're going to kind of shift gears talking about challenges to treating DM. Some of the discussion questions are going to be, what are you currently doing to manage DM symptoms? So what medications are you using or treatments? We want to even know, things like, are you using acupuncture or CBD or something, that's maybe not a typical treatment? How well do these treatments treat the most significant symptoms of DM? And then we also want to hear about the downside. So what are the most significant side effects to your current treatments, and how do they affect your loved one's daily life? We want to hear about this because sometimes, even though there's a treatment available, it does not mean that it's, curative or that it's really helping in a big way. And then finally, short of a complete cure, which of course everybody would like to see, what specific things would you look for in an ideal treatment for DM? So as if we've got drug companies listening and the FDA, we really want to hear from you about what you would like in a new treatment. Next slide. So our discussion format on the day of the meeting, as I said, there'll be a panel of patients and caregivers for each of the topics. We have 5 people in the morning and 5 people in the afternoon session that have pre-recorded statements. The purpose of these statements is to set the foundation for the broader audience discussion that will follow. These panelists were pre-selected to reflect a range of experiences with DM. And then after we hear from those panelists, then patients and caregivers in the audience and online will have a chance to answer polling questions. The polling is done on your telephone. There will be instructions on the day of the meeting how to enter a URL for something called Poll Everywhere, and the questions will just pop up on your telephone. And we only want people to participate in the polling that either have DM or they're a caregiver or relative of someone with DM. And then after we do some polling, we're going to have a live discussion with the audience. We're going to have a few people that'll be live on a Zoom call. And then, like I mentioned earlier, there will also be a telephone number where you can call in to share experiences. Our moderator will be James, who you heard from earlier. He's going to ask questions and invite you to submit responses either in writing or preferably live. We want as many of you to call in as possible. I see someone just put a chat message. Yes, great. I'm glad to see the enthusiasm. Next slide. So just a couple of tips on how to participate effectively on the day of the meeting. Kind of keep in the back of your mind what James had said about FDA's role and the purpose of the meeting. We're not going to want to talk about high insurance costs or high prices of medicine because the FDA doesn't regulate any of those things. We'd like you, maybe review some of these discussion questions in advance, which these will be on the website where you register. And if you have something important to share, try to relate it to the most appropriate topic or panel question that we're talking about, and then pick up your phone and call in. And please know it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience already voiced by someone that's similar to your own, because we want to establish that, yeah, this is something that really impacts people's lives with DM. But if you do, give it a personal or unique perspective. And try to keep your comments concise and focused. We want to try to hear from as many voices as possible about this very emotional topic. And please know that you can always send in additional written comments after the meeting's over, and that those comments that you send in, we will put those into the voice of the patient as well. So, participate in the meeting by webcast. That's, and we want you to participate in the polling, to call in with comments and written comments. You can pre-register for the meeting now at this URL here, dermatomyositis-el-pfdd.org/. Comments with answers to the questions can be submitted prior to the meeting, which is right now, and as I said, up to 30 days after the meeting, and we will put these into the voice of the patient report. Next slide. So in summary, this is your opportunity as a community to be part of the process and to move the process forward. Please know that each and every one of you can have a meaningful impact on clinical trial designs, as well as drug development for new treatments for DM. Your collective voices must be heard at the beginning of the process to try to help companies design trials that better meet your needs, as well as to help the FDA assess the risks and benefits with a fuller understanding of the impact of DM, and really to understand what is the lived experience and what is the patient and caregiver's perspective. So please, I hope you join us and help us get the word out to help make a difference. So we have a few minutes left, and we encourage you to submit questions through. There's a Q&A little balloon at the bottom of your screen. Please, write a question. It can be anything about the meeting, about what James covered in drug development. We're not, like James said, we're not going to talk about specific treatments right now, but this is really focused on the actual PFDD meeting.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry. And there have been quite a few questions that were both submitted during registration as well as through the Q&A box. And I think some through chat as well. So we'll try to get through as many as we can during the Q&A session we have right now. If we don't answer your question or weren't able to get to it, please just shoot us an email and we'll be sure to try to answer it but we'll now try to get through as many as possible. So the first question, and maybe Larry, you can tackle this. There's been a couple of questions. Is it still possible to participate as a panelist? Have the panelists already been chosen?
Yeah, so thanks. The panelists, we had to, those decisions were made actually a few months ago, because there was a step of trying to, orient the panelists, select them, and they've been working on their statements and they're already working on recording them. So unfortunately, we can't add more panelists at this point, but that does not mean you can't participate in the meeting live, calling in, writing in. We really want you to participate.
So another question, and this one might be for me, around the drug development process. There's a question that says, at what phase, if any, can someone with multiple autoimmune diseases and DM participate in a trial? So far, I have not been approved due to those other diseases. I understand why, but how do I participate? Are there any changes in the works for us as outliers? And so I don't have a direct answer to your question, in terms of whether there's anything in the works, but what I can tell you is that this kind of feedback on interest in participating in trials, but being excluded is really important to bring up at the PFDD meeting. Larry talked about the organization of the meeting and how in the afternoon session, we're going to be talking about treatments, not just your experiences with them, but your desires. And as part of that umbrella for treatments, clinical trials are part of that. We know when there's unmet medical needs, people seek out clinical trials as a way to supplement what's already available to them. And so if that's something that you're desiring and seeking, but can't do because you have some of these comorbidities, you should absolutely share that as part of that afternoon discussion at the PFDD. So another question that's come in, is there's two, and I'll maybe have one of our advocacy organization leaders here answer these. The first is, my friends and family want to listen into the PFDD so they can better understand my disease. Is it okay for me to invite them? And then another question along these lines is, can we network with others who have this disease at the PFDD meeting? Lynn, Paula, any of you want to start us off here?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Yes, yes, yes. We want your family there. This is a great opportunity to build awareness amongst the family as to what you as an individual go through with your DM. And it's a safe way to do it.
And there will be a lot of options for interactivity. It is a 5-hour virtual meeting, which might feel like a lot, but it's going to be so engaging and enriching. The time is going to fly by. There's some pre-recorded parts, as we mentioned, but some others that will be done live. And so it'll be really exciting to see it all unfold. And there will be some interactive elements, kind of similar like we have today. The chat has been pretty active.
And what I'll say too is, not only invite people to learn and, kind of also hear more, but if they're comfortable, have them participate as well. When we use the term caregiver, we really mean people that have an insight into this disease from, being a loved one. So, whether that's a sibling, a parent, a child, if they're someone that's, seen what you're going through, they're going to have a little bit of a different take, and they might notice different things than you as the person living with it notice, or vice versa. I mean, obviously, if you're a caregiver here and you encourage your loved one to attend, maybe they're a little less comfortable sharing. They can still at least participate in polling and submitting written comments, even if maybe they're not quite prepared to call in and talk.
I noticed there was it was kind of a comment in the chat, and it was about discussing the mental health side effects of medications. This is absolutely within scope of this meeting. When we are on panel, in the afternoon session after lunch, when we're focused on treatments, we want to hear about the benefits of the treatments that you're using, as well as the challenges, and mental health challenges can act, you know, they can be significant, actually causing some people to need to stop a medication. So we would love for you to come and share your experiences about that.
Yeah, similarly, I saw a comment, I think this was a registration comment that had come in that was saying, I'm currently in a study, but it's not ideal administration. And again, this is exactly the kind of feedback. It's not just about the direct benefits of the drugs, the direct risks, meaning like side effects of the drugs, but also how the drugs are administered, the burden of keeping up with, you know, the treatment regimens, and you know how it's actually delivered and what that feels like and how that impacts you. So for the person that wrote that in, you know, that is totally within the scope of this meeting as well. I did see that there was a question that said, does the meeting in June have closed caption in different languages for people who don't speak English? So the meeting is going to be broadcast over YouTube. And I know YouTube has been working very hard to have live captioning. And I know that they've already successfully rolled it out for English. I'm not sure whether that will be available for other languages by June, but I do know that the meeting will go on demand, so you can watch the whole recording the minute the meeting ends. Actually, give us like 10 minutes. I think there's like some processing time. It'll be up on the web page. And I know that the live captioning in other languages is available for recordings. So for anyone that speaks other languages that you'd like for them to have access to the meeting, they can absolutely watch it and can of course submit comments for 30 days after the meeting as well.
And James, I'd just like to interject that the website that we have created also has language capabilities. So even if it doesn't work for the meeting, you can still participate. You've got the opportunity to send in video clips. You've got the opportunity for written testimonials there too, and you can review that in the language of your choice. We've got 10 languages out there. So
thanks. I noticed a question too. Someone was asking about lung involvement. And if you've got, even if lung involvement is not, everyone doesn't have that, but if it's DM related, that absolutely is within scope of the meeting. Even, we might even like to hear if you have a condition that's not exactly related to DM, but it complicates your DM treatment or approach. Maybe you have one condition that prevents you from being able to take a medication that is indicated for DM. We'd like to hear about that as well, because it does add to, it's part of the patient experience.
We're right up, maybe actually a minute over now. I just want to check with Lynn or Paula if there's any final, anything final that you would like to share with the community, maybe a question that you saw in chat, or, just anything that's top of mind for you before we wrap up here.
Well, thanks, James. I will just offer briefly that, again, we'd love you to visit the PFDD website, where there are a lot of options to participate leading up to June 7th. We'll also be opening a survey there, so DM patients can share in that way as well. And there is some interest in a follow-up email. If you click on the email in the chat box, it will take you to the website, and then you can register for the PFDD website, as Manuel noted. So that would be the best way. But I think if you go to the TMA and MSU websites, you can get our emails pretty easily. I'll put mine in the chat. Thanks, Lynn. Over to you.
Thank you, Paula. I just wanted to reiterate again that we need you. We want you. We want full force of as many DM patients and caregivers and family, friends, other rare areas that overlap with yours. We want everyone there for this meeting, and let's show what the myositis community can do. We'll be following up with more communication across email blasts and Facebook and Instagram and other places with upcoming events. We want to push communications about not only to get you to the site to participate there before the meeting, take the survey, register, and just let's come full force to talk with the FDA. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
And, we look forward to seeing you at the meeting on June 6th, 7th.
Here.
June 7th, the 7th,
7th,
7th
yeah.
day of 6 months, yes.
6, 7, June 7th. Yes. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.